Good evening, everyone. And we are in Ecclesiastes Chapter 3. This is a very familiar passage, I would say, because we've turned it into a devotional, into a song. It seems to be a very encouraging outline that depicts a time for everything. And because of that, we need to actually spend some time to what I would say to unpack this book, this chapter. It says, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." Now, first, let me just unpack this. Now, under heaven, under the skies, as we have seen in the entire book of Ecclesiastes, this is man on the land and is under the skies as well as under the sun. And so this would be the view that Solomon takes always. It's under the skies. Now, what does he mean that to everything? To everything there is a season, and the word season is zaman. It is an appointed time. So that's what season means, right? An appointed time. Now, the word time here, and I guess right from the onset, I would like to encourage all of us to put aside our English dictionary so that when you read these English words, do not assume they carry the English definitions. And that would help us greatly in understanding the book. Now, this idea of time gives us a picture of a period or a moment. And this would be an A and a B, right? For every purpose and everything, it's giving us the same concept. And the idea of purpose here, I think we need to unpack this. The word purpose here is the same as Psalms chapter 1, verse 2. And the word is desire. The word is desire. And so the word purpose is not our general understanding of a purpose. The primary word is desire, things that we desire to do, right? So to everything and every purpose or every desire under the skies, there is a time for things to happen. And that is important for us to understand. And that would be the summary of this chapter. And so when we get into the rest of it, you need to understand that the word time means a specific moment. A season is a specific point in time. And so we are talking about, well, when things happen under the sun, under the skies, there is a right time for each to happen. And so let us unpack from verse 2 onwards. You see, a moment to be born. Now, the word born or to beget, right? If you read in the Bible, so and so beget this, so and so beget this. To give birth would be a good word. And a time to die. The idea of dying here, at least in the Hebrew, gives us the understanding that something comes to an end. And so don't think of dying or death in our modern day thinking. So the idea in Hebrew, when it comes to the word to die or death, it is something like life that we know comes to an end. And then a time to plant. The word plant is to stick into the ground, like how you plant paddy. And then the time to pluck would be to uproot. And that would be harvesting, right? So you can't plant and harvest at the same time. You can't be born and you can't come to an end at the same time. So that is what Solomon is trying to say. And he says it in so many ways. So a time to kill. Now, notice the word kill here is to strike with an intent to kill. And it's similar to, Cain slew Abel. That's the kind of concept. But at a time to heal. And the idea of healing is to be restored. And that's the idea of the healing here, right? A time to break down and a time to build up. Now, the idea of breakdown is parets. Parets is to break through, to throw down, to burst through, like a wall, right? If you have a wall, and so to break through is to create a crack in the wall, and this is to burst through. And this gives you a picture of people trying to breach the walls of the city. And a time to build up, and that would be the idea of building a construction, right? Or a wall in that sense, right? A time to weep. The idea of weeping here is to shed tears. And then a time to laugh. Well, I guess a time to laugh is like the same root word of Isaac, Yitzhak, right? Well, laughter in this case would be contrasted with shedding tears, and this would be to rejoice. That would be a good word to put that in. A time to mourn. The word mourn here is to lament. To lament, to wail. And then a time to dance. The idea of dancing here is to leap for joy. Notice, like I said, don't have our modern day understanding of mourning and dancing. This is a very Hebrew way of looking at mourning and dancing. So as I mentioned up front, please put your English dictionary aside. It's a time to beat your chest and wail, and that's mourning. And the time to leap for joy. And so you find that this is a pair, this is a pair, and this is an A, and this is a B. So you can see that there is these pairs that Solomon is writing, or the Kohelet is putting together. A time to cast away stones and the time to gather. So cast away is to throw it away. Gather is to bring together and to assemble. The idea here would be to collect, right? To collect. And this is to cast off. And so these are all contrasting phrases. A time to embrace. And the word embrace is very much to hug, to clasp each other, right? uh, in an embrace. And the idea here of refrain from embracing is to be far, to be distant. And so you can't embrace when you are standing far away or you are removed from the person. So you notice the word refrain is a modern English representation of the concept. Verse 6, a time to gain and a time to lose. Now, the word gain here means to find. And or to ask. That would be a good word to use. But the idea here of to lose is to destroy, to perish. You find this word in Psalms chapter 1, verse 6. And the way of the wicked is to perish. So these are contrasts. It's a Hebrew contrast. So don't look at the English word to understand it. Now, this word here, a time to keep and a time to throw away. The idea of keeping, I think you would see is to guard. And this is the word used to guard the commandments of God, to protect, to keep an eye on them, to make sure you treasure it. And then the idea of throwing away is to cast away. So you don't keep it anymore, you discard, right? You discard. And so you notice all of these are pairs of verbs. Now in the Hebrew, verbs are king, I would say, because it is to conjure an imagery in our mind. So we've gone through the prophet books, and it puts an imagery in our mind to really imagine what the Koheleth or Solomon is putting together. And so he's giving us pairs. A time to tear. The idea here is to tear to pieces. And then a time to sew. The idea of sewing is to sew together. Then a time to keep silence and a time to speak. The idea of keeping silent really is to, well, I guess in our modern day, is to shut up. Right? Shut up. To, how would you say, to keep your peace. Right? To keep your peace. Right? That's something to consider. A time to speak, and this would be, I would say, a time to speak up. To speak up about matters. Because this word is about davar, right? It's about davar. So there's always a time to say things, but there's also a time to not say anything. And in verse 8 would be the last verse for our pairs: a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. The word love here is ahav, something that I would want us to learn. Ahav means to love, and is to give. And the word hate is saneh, is to turn away. To turn away from giving. And that is the word hate in this case. A time for war, battle. And a time for peace. Now, we all know this word, shalom. And so it's called peace mainly because there is completeness. It's also because there is friendship. And so this would be the contrast of battle and friendship. And so there is peace when there is friendship in a relationship. And so things are happy. So what we have seen in this entire chunk of 7 verses is how the Koheleth is trying to tell us, there is always the right time, an appointed time. Even when you have a fruit tree, there is a season. There is nothing to say that, no, you can do it all the time. And so this is wisdom. This is wisdom for life. And that is how the Koheleth is now giving us, in a way, we like this, but it's poetry. It's poetry to us. And so let us bear in mind the Hebrew context, the Hebrew meanings, and take it to heart for our lives. Now he comes back and reminisce about advantage. What is the advantage? When somebody who does things, who does work, from what he toils, so he spends his time when he's doing work, he is wearied, he labor, he toils. What good does it bring him? That's always been the question. I have seen, and always remember, the Hebrew is always very visual, either in the mind or in literal eyes, that this is the God-given task which the sons of Adam, which is humanity, is to be busy with. And so when we are busy with work, that is a God-given task. That's what Solomon said. Everyone who is born into this world has to labor, has to work, has to toil. We have to do work. But the question that the Koheleth is asking is, what's the advantage of doing this? God says that you are to work, but then God will make everything beautiful. And the word beautiful, although we have made it into a song, the word beautiful here is better than natural. If something is natural, beautiful is better than that. But it will always happen in its moment. And this moment of time is what verses 2 to 7 is all about. When the right time comes after you sow, you will harvest. And that's the whole idea. He has put olam in their hearts, except no one can find out the work of God from beginning to end. Now, this one we have to unpack it a little bit. I would say that when you talk about God has put eternity, I don't quite like this word eternity. I would say that he has put olam, he has put an understanding of secrets, or the knowledge of the world, right? The world or secrets in the hearts of man to search for secrets. And I would think that would be the case, because man would be longing to know things. But the conclusion that the Koheleth has is this, that mankind, the word no man here is mankind, will not be able to discover, I would say to discover or what we say is to learn the full works of God from start to end. Now, the idea here would be from the start, we know the word start here is Rosh. Rosh is start. But the end here would be Suf. And so we need to understand that is the concept of the idea of where the head and end is. And what God is doing in this perspective, that Solomon is saying, although God has put this kind of a desire of the world and the secrets of God into the heart so that we long to know, but no man can really discover everything about God's work, everything that he has done. And even when God tells us in the Bible, and Solomon would have learned the Torah, there will be much that is not left in the Torah. That much of what God has done is not recorded as well. And God has found it necessary to avoid saying a whole lot of things which is not found there. But man still longs to know that. That is, I think, the construct that we have here. And so he says, I know, I can experience, nothing is better. The word better again is tov, for them than to rejoice. The word rejoice is to be glad and to do good. And see, the word know, do, see, everything is very visual, right? Very visual. And it says here to make things that is tov in their lives. And that is the right thing to do. That is the best thing to do. And then he says again, as in the conclusion of chapter 2, and also that every man, and the word here in verse 13, every man will be every human, should eat, drink, and enjoy the tov of his labor. It is the gift of God. And this is interesting. This is the word gift actually means I think it would be useful for us to use this word, a reward of God, right? A present. Now, we all like presents, and God gives presents, and the present is from what we do. Everything we toil, that we should enjoy, eat and drink, and enjoy the good of all his labor. Now, obviously, eat and drink is a colloquial phrase in the Oriental culture, in the Hebrew culture, even in the Asian culture, that we should actually sit back and enjoy and relax about life, because there is a time to enjoy. Again, time. There is a proper time to do that, because working is a God-given task. You see? Laboring is a God-given task. So what is the advantage? Well, if you keep working and don't do anything about it, there is no advantage. But when you work hard and you have the fruits of your labor, then every man should enjoy it, right? That's what God is saying. Enjoy it. And let me just briefly tell you what this word enjoy is all about. The word enjoy is to see tov. It's a surprising word, but our English word just doesn't come close. See the good side of life. See the good side of life from the good fruits of your labor. Now, everything good here would be from the perspective of man, right? That he sees it as the good thing to do. I would see also from God, because when you look at it from the perspective of God as a reward of God, God has to see it as good as well. And so otherwise you would find that man enjoying good from our own view will be somewhat lopsided. And so when we look at things which are good, we have to see it from God's perspective that it is also good, because that's what God is giving us to see and then to eat and drink of it. Now, of course, people in those days is about planting and harvesting, that they should enjoy what they have planted and what they have sown, right? And that is the idea, that you just don't plant, and sow, and work, and labor, and toil. And then you rest one day and then you do it again for the next 6 days. So the Kohelet is saying, what good is this? So when we do this God-given task to labor, to sweat, and to work hard, and he says, well, nothing is better for them, nothing is tov for them than to be glad, make good in their lives. See, our lives, in the view of the wise man Solomon, the Koheleth, he learns this from God, I would say, because God gave him this innate ability to dissect what he sees, to analyze and to synthesize. That's what we call wisdom. Now, obviously, some of us may not have that kind of wisdom, because we can look at things but we can't make heads or tails out of it. But Solomon, on the other hand, has this innate ability. He looks at life after all these long years and he says, you know what? As a king, I also have to work. But it's okay to enjoy the fruit of your labor, see what is good, but it's also looking at it as a gift of God. And we should never forget that. Verse 14, I know, and I understand this, the word know comes from the word to see and experience, and therefore you know that whatever God does, that everything that God makes, and then he says, it shall be olam. Now understand this. This is not forever, right? This means that God does this for a long time. A long time. But there is always a time that when it begins, there will be a time for it to be torn down and to end. So there is a time, but it will be a long time. And whatever God does, understand this, that we don't add, right? We don't add to it. We don't take from it. God makes it. Understand this. God makes it. And whatever God makes you, you cannot add to it. And this word add literally means to put more, right? To cause to increase. And so mankind will not be able to add to what God has done. But mankind certainly is not to remove. And that's important. Now, the word here in verse 14 is to clip from it, is to diminish it. It is to, what else can we say? To remove or to lessen. Now, once you see this explanation taken from, doesn't really just mean take away. It means do not treat what God has done or made to be any less than what God has made it for. Which means that when God has made something to be important, we are not to treat it as less important. Now, I will leave it to your judgment to understand how that would be, because the Koheleth is saying, just understand, when we look at the things around us, when we read the words of God, God has brought it into existence, and it has to be there for a long time. Now, depending on what we are looking at, it really has a context, but it's everything that God has done, God has made, right? God makes. That man should fear God. And this is the idea I want to spend some time on. Verse 14, fear to his face. What does that mean? It means that if this is us and this is God, we are standing before God. And the Koheleth says we need to learn to fear God. And thereby it changes some of our perspective. I'm not sure how you would see the word fear, but for a long time, we have tried to soften this word fear to what we call reverent, right? To be respectful, to be reverent. But I would submit to you that although that is one aspect of it, it's a very small aspect of it. In fact, the word fear throughout Scripture means be afraid. And let me explain to you why. Why does the Koheleth say and summarize here that God has done whatever he has done? We're not to add to it, to increase it. We are not to diminish it, because whatever God does, that all humanity. So we're not just talking about, how should we say? We're not talking about just mere men, right? It's all humanity is supposed to be afraid of God to his face. And so this is what is important. You have to know God, because if you don't know him, what is there to fear? People who don't know God doesn't fear God. And so it is important for us now to know. And the Koheleth is now telling the children of Israel. And we are reading it. And if you know God, the Koheleth said, you should fear God. And the reason is in verse 15. That which has already been, that which is to be has already been. And God requires an account of what is past. Now, let me just unpack this. The word requires an account is to demand. God is going to demand of us. And that is what it means. Okay? And he will demand of us. And the idea of what is past is, how should we say, what is behind. Now, remember, yesterday and the day before we have talked about this. This is the front, and whatever the front is, it is the past. But this word here is what will come after, will harass. And this is a very strange phrase, right? To pursue. And this idea that things will chase you down gives us a picture of things that has been done by man. That whatever man has done will come, I would say the picture would be, will come to haunt you, right? In our modern day, will come to haunt. Because God is going to demand of us. Now, let me just put these two verses together. This is important for us to understand. The reason why we should fear before God is God requires an account for what we have already done. And this account of already done talks about judgment. God will ask for an account. He is going to demand of us to explain ourselves. And that is why man should fear God. Now, I have shared some stories before. The idea here, if you are afraid of someone, like a father, like God, the reaction, the normal, natural reaction of fearing God is not fearing for life, but fearing to make choices very carefully. Why? Because God will ask us to account for it. And hence, when we enjoy ourselves and we want to see life the way that the Koheleth has spoken, there is a balance. And the balance is this: whatever we choose to eat and drink and to see the good of our labor, as a gift of God, from God's perspective, we also have to fear God, because the choices we make, we have to give an account. That is what the Koheleth is also telling us. The Koheleth continues to say, moreover, I saw under the sun. So the idea of under the sun and under the skies come from just a slight nuance difference, but basically everything that is in life that we can see, that in the place of judgment, wickedness was there. In the place of righteousness, iniquity was there. I said in my heart, speaking to himself, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and for every work. You see, judgment. There is a time in verse 17 for every desire and for every deed that you do. Why? Because God will judge. Let me just put it in bold. So we fear God because God is our judge. But we don't fear him and we are crippled. We fear God to make doubly sure that our choices in life is in line with God's desire, from God's perspective. And that is what it means to fear God. Our last segment is this: I said in my heart, speaking to himself, concerning the condition, of the sons of Adam. So this would be humanity. The word condition here would be the estate. So condition is a good word. God will test them. And this is really important. How would you say this? God will the word here is not the normal word for tests. This word here literally means to prove that it is true, to choose. To choose means to select from a bunch, and by selecting, you need to test it to be acceptable. And that's the whole picture of this word test. So God continually tests men, and then to see that they may see that they themselves are like animals. Wow. What does that mean? There is an animal aspect in all human beings. And that is something which we seldom talk about. We know that man has a ruach, a spirit. But apart from that, we are like all other animals. And so the Bible discloses to us that we can see that there is an animalistic aspect of human beings. Now, please let us set aside the modern day understanding of animalistic. The idea of see themselves as animals is about the desire. There is a fleshly desire for things that they can see. And God is testing us to see whether we understand that we have a similar animalistic existence. For what happens to the sons of men also happens to animals. The animals have desires. Humanity has desires. And this is the idea of covet. When we succumb to our desires, we are no better than animals. And hence, the importance is to learn that the choices we make cannot be purely animalistic, but be able to see it from the perspective of God, in fear of God, that we can balance our choices to make the right ones. One thing befalls them. What is the same thing that happens to both? Both will die. Both will die. Look at ourselves as animals because both will die. One breath. They all have one breath. The idea of one breath here is one life. Okay? And this is one wind. A ruach. One wind. What is inside of man, we can't see, but we know that's something in there, and we call it the wind of man. They all have one wind. Man has no advantage over animals. So all is vanity. Vanity is nebulous. There's nothing to hang on to, right? Things will come and things will go. But look at what Solomon says. Although we all appear to be similar, that man and animals, that we have instincts, we have desires, but both will die. And we only have one life that we can live. There is no advantage over animals. All go to one place. And in the ancient times, the one place that man goes to, all are from dust, and all will return to dust. And that's how they see. Notice the word see. The place in this case that they describe is to the ground. All return to the ground. Now we know this word return is shuv. Return to the original state. So it looks like God made us from the dust of the ground. And so he says, who knows? The wind of the sons of men. That would be the ruach, right? The part that you can't see, but you know that it's inside. That when the ruach is no longer there, the person is said to have ended. How do you know the spirit of humanity? And he says the spirit of humanity goes up. And by going up, it's an idiom. It's an idiom. Upward would be to the skies. And in so doing, to God. And the ruach of the animal, that's the other idea here, is there is the wind or the ruach of the animal. It will descend. Goes down is descend to the land. And this is a picture that Solomon is asking. What do you know of the spirit of humanity? It ascends. It goes upwards. It ascends. But the spirit or the wind of the animal, it descends. And that is one thing that the wisdom of the Koheleth has managed to disclose to us. And so the end point of men and animals by the flesh seems to go back to the dust, but by the ruach seems to go to different places. And there is nothing left of the ruach of the animals once it goes down to the earth. And he concludes, so I perceive that nothing is better, and the word better is tov, then a man should rejoice, be glad in his own works, his own occupation. For that is his heritage. That is his share from God. Every man has to work. But what is interesting is this question: who can bring him to see what will happen after him? Remember, after, this is front, this is past, and behind is after, this is future. And so the idea in this context is after he dies. Now let me just pause here and give us a little commentary about this paragraph. The Koheleth comes one full circle and says, for men and animals, we all seem to be alike. We have the desires and we will both die. But when we die, we all go down to the dust, right? But the spirit of man, we don't know. We all know, the only thing we know, as the Koheleth says, that it ascends. And when it ascends upwards, it implies, or he implies, that it returns to God. And the ruach of the animal, he implies it descends into the land and it disappears. And you notice everything under the sun must be seen, must be evidenced, must be eaten, must be enjoyed, must be visualized, must be experienced. And then he says, you know what? I perceive, I know, I experience there is nothing better. So that humanity should just be happy with what he is doing. That is our portion in life. All of us have a different portion of life. We are born in different places. We have different environment and scenarios. But when we are dealt with that portion, we would make the best of the portion to make it as a reward of God and not complain about that. And it appears that when we do better, there is fruits of the labor we can enjoy. But the final question that the Koheleth then asks, how can humans or humanity see exactly what is going to happen? What will be? Now, the word happen is what will be after he dies. And the answer is we don't. That's what the Koheleth is implying here. We don't. The answer is rhetorical, obviously. Who can show him? And that's the word bring, right? Who can cause him to see? No one. And that's the very strange thing about the Old Testament, that as a commentary I want to leave with us before we end today, is that the Old Testament, as we read, like what we have read here, really doesn't talk much about what is after the person, after he dies. Why? Because it cannot be evidence. You can't see. You can't bring somebody back and say, see, I show you what's happening. And that is the Koheleth saying, that is what we need to understand. And since we can't see, you have to trust God. You have to trust God. And what we can see under the sun, under the skies, under heaven, is to do what we must do as a God-given task, do the best we can, and do it right before the eyes of God, do it with the fear of God, and we enjoy the fruits of the labor to eat and drink and see the goodness of life in the fear before God. And that was the whole picture that the Koheleth now at the end of chapter 3 summarizes. Why? Because really I can't evidence to you what is going to come hereafter. But we do know that the Ruach, or the spirit of humans, goes up. And where it goes back to God, I suppose, right? And that's what the Koheleth is now insinuating. And so with this, I would leave it to all of us to go back and ponder into chapter 3 of the book of Ecclesiastes, and we come to a close right now.